Welcome to the Circle of Birth podcasts. I'm your host and advocate, Ali Kranz. These podcasts are here to gather stories, people and information to better our understanding of the wisdom of birth and how we can reclaim our connections to birth from conception and beyond. You will hear stories not only from Australia but from all over the world, bringing together women, partners, midwives, doulas and all the people that have a birth story to share. So jump right in for this next Circle of Birth story. So today's podcast, I'm talking to Tanya Strasberg, and she is a certified Lamaze Childbirth educator. In fact, she is like the pioneer of Lamaze in Australia. So if you listen to her story, she'll tell you her two birth journeys. Really interesting to hear about birth in Israel and the support systems there and how she become into Lamaze. And I'm pretty sure I kept saying Lamaze throughout this podcast. I don't know why. But really interesting stories, beautiful birth journeys, and a great person. Enjoy. Hi, Tanya, and welcome to the Circle of Birth. Thank you so much for taking your time and coming to share your two birth stories with us.
Thank you for having me, Ali. Lovely to be here.
No problem. Now, we'll start off with if you just tell us a bit about yourself and the work that you're doing, and then we can go and kick straight into your stories. You've got a son who is 7 and a daughter who is 6 years old. Is that right?
Correct,
Yeah,
yes.
Great.
Yeah, beautiful. So I, as I said, you've just said, I've got two beautiful children, son and a daughter. Oh gosh, what can I tell you? So look, I certainly didn't ever imagine that I would end up working in this field as a childbirth educator and a trainer and I guess all-round birth, advocate. I had worked for many, many years in the performing arts, actually. That was what I sort of did straight out of school and, all through my 20s pretty much. And I think that's what I thought I would always do. I ended up, I was actually born and raised in Hong Kong, of all places. My parents lived over there for many, many years. And so I didn't come to Australia to live until I was 23 when we moved here. So it was very new for me. I didn't, grow up here, didn't have friends here, didn't really have any professional kind of connections. I sort of ended up spending about the next 10 years or so really working, in the Australian arts industry, which was amazing and, very exciting and enjoyable work. I think, though, what was this real turning point for my life and I guess the direction that, it ended up going in was my decision to move overseas and move to Israel, of all places. Yeah. Bit of a globetrotter. So I packed my bags, quit my job, put all my stuff in storage and just said, right, I'm off to go and live in Israel, which I did when I was 30. I think I had my midlife crisis a little bit younger than most people. So I ended up finding myself there. I did have some friends. I did have some extended family that I had never met until I got there. But ended up, I think, I guess proverbially and realistically, I actually ended up finding myself there of all places. I think I really, I needed to take that complete, exit from my life to really work out who I was and what I wanted to do with my life. And at that point, I was still very much, I guess, working, in an arts sort of environment. But I guess not long after I moved there, I ended up meeting who now my husband of about 8 and a bit years, but we met and my life kind of went boom, 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 boom. Literally, we met, we got married 8 months after we met. We had our son, a year later. We had our daughter a year after that. So I kind of went from being this, happy-go-lucky, footloose, fancy-free, single chick to just being married with 2 children. And in the space of, literally 2 and a bit years, it was crazy.
Midlife crisis over.
Oh, yeah. Did I come down with a thump? So reality hitting me square in the face. But I guess the the full circle that I ended up coming to, and I guess this is really how I ended up becoming involved in work with birth and pregnancy and birth, is when I was expecting my son, he's 7 now. My husband and I attended a Lamaze class in Jerusalem. I was really super keen to find, an antenatal class in English, even though my Hebrew was pretty good. I just, the only thing on offer was really the hospital classes, which are as bad in Israel as they are everywhere else in the world, to be honest. And I didn't want to go down that route. So, I asked around a few friends who'd had children, and they said, oh, you've got to go to this woman in Jerusalem. She's it. She's the only person you need to go to. A woman called Rachelle Oseran, who had, originally was, I think from Zimbabwe and via America, and it ended up settling in Israel many, many years earlier. But she was a native English speaker and an extremely experienced childbirth educator. She'd, by that point, had already been teaching for about 28 years. So she was amazing, and it had a really powerful impact on me, and I think my husband as well, in terms of preparing us, for the birth of our first child. I really think I can kind of nail that particular experience of doing that class as a pregnant woman, expecting her first baby, as being, I think, a massive kind of catalyst for me, for then deciding that this is what I really need to do with my life, if that kind of makes any sense at all.
So was there many locals partaking in the course?
She used to do lovely, small, intimate classes at her home. So we would be, usually it would be 5 or 6 couples. She definitely attracted a very, very diverse group of people. So usually it would be at least one of the couple would be a native English speaker, which is why I guess they'd be seeking out, English language childbirth education. She wasn't the only one in Israel, but she certainly had a really, amazing reputation. But she often worked with couples where one partner was Israeli, one was an English speaker. She also was well known for sort of teaching lots of diplomats and foreign, media people who were based in, as Middle East correspondents and stuff. So she always had very interesting people. And in fact, what was one of the, I think, most interesting things that for Rachelle really changed her direction as an educator was that at one point she had a couple in her class who were Palestinian, and they were desperate to find childbirth education and couldn't find anything in Ramallah, which was the city they were living in. So they decided to book in with Rachelle's class. And this woman called Shadden sort of came to her afterwards and said, this experience for me was mind blowing. I want to be able to give women in my community this opportunity. Like, we don't have childbirth education like this. It doesn't exist, in the Palestinian territories. So Rachelle thought about that for a long time and then decided that she would herself become accredited as a program director and a trainer through Lamaze International. And she launched the first Lamaze Educator training in Israel that had ever existed. So I was part of her very first group. And Shadden, who was the one she wasn't in my class when we were pregnant, although our sons are about the same age, actually. But we met in that class, and the group that she had in that very first pilot program, in a sense, we were kind of like a microcosm of Israel. We had Jewish, we had Arab, we had religious, we had secular, we had really young women with, young children, and we had a woman who was already a grandmother of about 8 grandchildren. So we just spanned everything. And the course was both, it blew all of us away, just what we were learning. But I think what we shared together as a group of women studying that, and I think we all had this sense, that what we were doing was really, really important, important for us as women, important for our community, important for the communities we were serving in Israel. At that point, we hadn't planned to move back to Australia by that point. So I was quite, focused on how I could build a practice as an independent childbirth educator in Israel where I was living. But, fates a very strange thing. And shortly after I certified with Lamaze International, my husband and I decided that we wanted to move to Australia. For me, it was moving home, even though I hadn't really lived in Australia for about 10 years. It's a long, long time. And for him, he'd never even been to Australia. So it was a huge, huge shift for us. But we came back, and we came with our kids when they were almost, just trying to remember, I think my daughter was almost 2 and my son was almost 3. So that was 4 and a bit years ago. Yeah.
Okay. So basically you brought Lamaze into Australia.
Well, yeah, unintentionally.
Yeah.
I landed and thought, okay, well, I'm not going to set my business up in Israel, so I'll set it up here instead, and just assumed that there would be a group of Lamaze educators all over the place, because it's a very widely known childbirth education. I mean, it's probably the oldest childbirth education program in the world. It's been around for over 50 years, and has evolved obviously considerably over time. But there are Lamaze educators literally practicing on all parts of the globe. But I looked up the International Directory of Educators, and I was just gobsmacked when I realised that there were no other educators here in Australia. So I guess, completely unintentionally, I brought it here. Hopefully in the near future, I won't be the only one practicing, because I've also started to train Lamaze educators here, which is really, really exciting. So,
So there was a reason why you met Rachelle, I'd say.
I guess so. Absolutely. And we're seeing each other in October, actually, because Lamaze have a conference every year in a different city in America. And we've both been invited to speak at the conference this year, which is really lovely. So we're sharing a room together at a hotel. We're so excited to see each other. I was just a pregnant mum in her class, and we've both kind of gone on this amazing journey kind of in parallel, but quite bizarrely. I'm super excited to see her again. Yeah.
So back to your pregnancy with your son. So you joined the Lamaze with Rachelle.
Yeah.
Now, how did you go with your pregnancy and the support that you got from the midwives in the system, or the doctors or obstetricians, or what you chose to do?
Yeah. So the maternity care system in Israel, in general, healthcare in Israel is a completely socialized national healthcare system. So, I mean, not dissimilar to Medicare here, but it's much, much wider there. Like, there really doesn't exist. There's no private maternity, for example. That just doesn't exist, full stop. So everybody's through the national healthcare system. It's completely free. Money does not exchange hands for any services whatsoever, which is a good thing. And you are primarily cared for by midwives throughout pregnancy. You go to your local health clinic for your antenatal checkups. You wouldn't go to the hospital, for example. You literally, if you're going to give birth in hospital, you just rock up there when you're in labour. But all the antenatal checks are just done with in your local health clinic. I think, to be honest, I probably saw an obstetrician, I don't know, maybe 2 times in the whole pregnancy for scans and stuff like that. So it was nice low tech care, which I appreciated. I was 36 when I had my son, and 37 when my daughter was born. So by Israeli standards, I was actually a bit of an old mum, because I guess culturally over there, women tend to have their babies quite a lot younger, particularly in the religious communities. And I'm not religious, but religious Jewish women, religious Arab women are definitely starting their families in their very early 20s. So to get to 35, another woman in the community might be on baby number 8 or 9 by that point. So they kind of looked at me a bit odd, like, oh, you're 36 and this is the first one. But look, I think for the most part, I was really lucky. I had a really, really good pregnancy, quite textbook. I was so blessed with both of them. I didn't have a day of morning sickness with either, and I know there are mums out there who hate me for that. But to be honest, if I hadn't taken the P-stick test, I wouldn't have known I was pregnant. Like, I had Yeah, look, I think there were only with my son. I think there were two things that stood out for me that I think I'll always remember, and in the sense of not being particularly positive memories, but one, and actually they both involved the obstetrician that I saw a handful of times. So the first one was I had done a little bit of reading up about antenatal testing, and I was really quite adamant that I wanted just to do what they call the triple test, which is just a blood test. It's non-invasive. It gives you some statistical analysis about your risk for your baby having a chromosomal, abnormality, particularly things like Down syndrome. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to look at the results, and I'm going to make, I'm going to think about it further if I need to think about it further. But I didn't want to do anything more than that. And certainly I was very averse to doing amniocentesis. And so I remember going to the doctor at some point in the pregnancy. I said, okay, well, can you give me, the referral for the blood test, because I want to do the triple test screening. And he looked at me, he's like, well, you missed the first round of tests. And I said, well, no. And he says, well, no, it's much too late to do that. You're already, middle of your second trimester. He says, I just assumed you were going to do amnio. I said, why would you assume that? He says, because you're 36, as if I was like 90 years old. And I was just in that moment, I was so incensed because, first of all, he had made, an assumption about my care. And more importantly, he had robbed me of me being able to make choices about my pregnancy. And in the end, what I did was I took the second round of tests, which, you're supposed to compare first trimester and second trimester tests. I know all this in hindsight. Mm-hmm. I didn't know it at the time. And I remember just sitting there with only one set of blood tests and just that anger of like, you really, you've made this decision really difficult for me now because I'm not working with the full picture here. But my instinct kicked in, and I just remember thinking, no, everything is fine. I know I'm fine. I know my baby's fine. And I just, and I refused. And he could see how kind of pissed off he was, to be honest, that I hadn't just done what he assumed I was going to do. And that same doctor, I remember coming in and sort of saying to him, asking him a question about something, and he looked at me square in the eye and he just said, you know what your problem is? You read too much.
Wow.
Yeah. What can I say about that?
Yeah.
So, look, he had a bone to pick about, my age. He had a bone to pick about my weight. All these sort of things. I mean, if he could find something to kind of, I suppose make me feel worried or stressed about my pregnancy, he was kind of determined to do it. But thankfully, because he wasn't a private obstetrician, he wasn't my primary care provider, I really had very little to do with him. He certainly wasn't at the birth or anything like that. So I just try to shake it off, really. But it upset me. It really, really upset me at the time. And I remember it really shook my confidence. But in the end, what happened with me was that I went really, really, really late. I was I was at the end of 42 weeks. No sign of this baby that we nicknamed Bumba, which is it's a snack. It's a peanut snack in Israel, but he looked like a little piece of Bumba in the ultrasound, so we called him Bumba. So I'm like, Bumba's not coming. He's not coming. I remember going to just a checkup at the clinic. I was one day shy of being at the end of 42 weeks, and they did a little quick ultrasound, and they saw that there was basically no amniotic fluid left, and very full term baby, not a big baby. Nobody freaked me out saying, oh, you've got the big baby thing, but they were a bit concerned about the fact that there wasn't any fluid, and I had really got to the end of 42 weeks. To be honest, I think if I had had him here in Australia, they would have been pushing induction a good week before this point. They really did want to just wait and hope that I went into spontaneous labour. And I didn't. I didn't. And who's to say, look, if he would have come another day later or 2 days later, we don't know. But again, I think, when it's your first baby, I think no matter how well prepared you are, how much, education you've done and reading and I think we're pretty universal as first-time mothers in that we are worried and we do stress, and when somebody tells us that something's not right, we tend to freak out a little bit.
Especially when you've got a doctor telling you that you read too much. And
So I was a bit, I was a bit stressed about everything, and then they just said, I literally went from the clinic. They said, no, you're not going home. We've called ahead to the hospital and they're expecting you just need to go straight there. And I was like, what? So I remember, my husband was with me, so we went together. But, I remember calling the doula and saying, okay, you're going to need to meet us there. And
so you hired a doula?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's common over there to have a doula?
It's interesting. It's probably a little bit more known and sort of accepted there than I would say here, although doulas are definitely growing in I guess the awareness of the benefits of having a doula are growing here. But in Israel, I think it was there's a reason culturally why doulas, or they're known as other names there, but are becoming more popular, and that's largely also because of the religious considerations of women there. Within certainly, I can't really talk so much about Muslim cultures, but I would imagine there'd be some real similarities with issues of modesty and so forth. But in the Jewish religion, if a couple are religious, there comes usually a certain point in her labor where her husband can't be with her. He can't support her physically, and he sometimes can't even be in the room. So there is an absolute need for female labor support other than the midwifery care. So it is normal and standard that women have, and it may not be somebody she's paid for. It might be her mother. It might be a woman in the community who's known as like the birth lady type of thing. But it's very, very normal and common. But I hired a fabulous doula who ended up actually being the same doula we used to the next year for my daughter. So she met us there, and I think what I wasn't prepared for with induction was just how long it was going to take. I was induced on a Thursday afternoon. They started with with basically Cervidil, suppository, prostaglandin suppository, and then they used the gel about 12 hours later, and then they did another one after that, and nothing. I mean, I had no cervical dilation. There was like nothing. So that's probably the worst type of induction to go through when you're literally going from zero, which I guess, and again, hindsight, I look and I think, well, clearly I just wasn't ready to go into labor. So it was an uphill struggle all the way, really. Basically, I think the induction methods just became more and more invasive, and it wasn't long before they hooked me up to an IV with Pitocin, but it's Syntocin in here, and that was really difficult. That was, to be honest, quite excruciating. I didn't have any pain relief. They insisted on continuous monitoring, but they agreed to let me sit in a chair rather than lying on the bed. So I remember just sitting in this chair, and I wasn't yet in a birthing suite because I wasn't in labor. So they had me in a little kind of curtained off section, in the kind of what would be here, you'd have as the sort of the assessment area, the triage, whatever. No privacy. It wasn't in a room of my own. And it was me and my husband and my doula all squished in this tiny little space, which wasn't much wider than the bed itself. And I just will never forget just sitting in that chair with these bloody feet, CTG machine just strapped to my belly with this Pitocin running through my veins, causing these unbelievably painful contractions, and just no one coming, no one helping me, no one supporting me, other obviously than my own my labor support. And eventually there was a midwife who was in another room who heard me probably screaming the the roof down, who came in and just said, "This is ridiculous." She's, I'm taking you off this. This is just ridiculous. And bless her. I mean, she put me out of, incredible amount of discomfort. I wish, to be honest, I was thinking about this, before we talked, and I thought, oh God, I don't have this amazing kind of, empowering, beautiful birth story to share. But then I guess I thought about it again, and I thought, you know what? There's so many women whose experiences are exactly like mine. And I don't know if you've ever read these stories, these columns sometimes in magazines, which is, what I wish I could tell my teenage self type of thing. So I was thinking, what I could tell about my pregnant self looking back, with a little bit of hindsight and a whole lot more education and knowledge now. And I just think all the things I just would have done differently. But, look, this labour kind of went on and on. As I said, it started on a Thursday. He actually wasn't born until Saturday morning. This is a long labour.
Wow.
But again, look, saying that, it certainly wasn't all bad. I ended up with an epidural, which, to be honest, was probably the best thing that I could have had in that labour. I was so tired and so, so uncomfortable. But to be honest, I think, again, had I had him here in Australia, after, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 hours of, nothing much happening, they would have said, failure to progress, let's wheel you into surgery and have a cesarean. No question about it, especially my age and, for everything. I was classic cesarean scenario. But to their credit, in Israel, they were really, really averse to that. To them, that was last resort. That was, if we have clear signs of fetal distress, of course we'll do something. But if mum and baby are okay, we're just going to keep going. So I'm very grateful for that, because having a cesarean was like, the last thing on earth that I wanted. And I had great emotional support. If they could, they couldn't help me with a lot of things, but they certainly helped to keep my emotional morale up, which was huge. And I think the thing that really made ultimately the biggest difference for me was I had there was one midwife who, interestingly enough, she was the midwife on shift at the very beginning when I came in for the induction, and she was back on shift when I was in the final hours of this marathon labor. And she was from England. She was from the north of England, and she had a really northern English, like Geordie accent, which was so weird in Israel. Like, everyone around me was Israeli and, strong Hebrew, Israeli accents. And there was this one woman who, she was just, I swear she had, wings coming out of her back. She was my angel. And she said to me, "Oh my God," she says, "you're still here?" She goes, "Let's get this baby out now." By that point, I don't know how many hours. It's probably well over 30 hours of labor by that point. And I didn't know this until after he was born, but my husband said, how in labor sometimes we just completely, have huge memory lapses. And there are definitely chunks of this labor that I have zero memory about. And one of them was that the doctor had come in, and he was already, like, the OR was prepped, he was scrubbed, he was already gowned up and everything. He was ready to just go. Like, they had said, enough is enough is enough. This woman needs a cesarean, this baby needs to come out. And Polly, who was the midwife with me at that point at the very end, I remember she kind of leaned over, she whispered in my ear, and she said to me, and she was quite tough by this point, she said, "You know what?" She goes, "You have 5 minutes to get this baby out, or you're going to have a cesarean." And she goes, "Now I need you to push." And I had an epidural. I had no pushing urges. I feel nothing. I didn't know where he was in my body. I didn't know what was going on. And I was on my back. I mean, it was just like every card was stacked against me. but something in the way she said or the urgency, I don't know, but something, just my instinct kicked in. I'm like, damn, I've got to get this kid out of me. And I just remember just pushing as if my life depended on it, literally. And he came out. Like I remember the doctor came in right at the very end, and literally, his head was out, shoulders were presenting, and the doctor's, like, his jaw dropped, and he was just like, oh my God. He said, how did that? I left the room for a minute and this baby's here. And he was shocked. He was absolutely convinced that this, cesarean was the way to go. So he was amazed, and out he came. And you know what? He was in great shape. He had a good APGAR score. He was really, good hearty cry, good color. The only thing that, was pretty evident after he was born, the placenta came out, was the placenta was just, it had given up the ghost a long time ago. The midwife showed me, it was calcified. It was like gray. So, maybe perhaps in hindsight, the induction, I mean, I don't doubt that it was the right way to go, because I think certainly looking at the placenta, I could see he was not getting the nutrients that he needed from it. And he was fine that day, but who knows how he would have been the next day, for example. So you never know. But, look, at the end of the day, yes, it was a really long and tough labor. I had literally every intervention under the sun, bar the cesarean. Sorry, go ahead.
How were those moments for you after going through all of that and all those hours when he came out? How was that for you, that feeling?
I think that there's a photo, actually. I didn't send it to you. I might send it to you after having told this story. But there was the first photo that was taken after he was born, and our doula took it. And it's me and my husband, and you actually can't see my son, but he's there. I'm holding him. And the two of us look, I swear to God, we look absolutely shell-shocked. There's just this look on, and our expressions are almost identical. It's really a bit strange and uncanny, but we both look like we'd come out of a war zone. So I think initially I felt really, really wiped, like my body had never been through anything like that in my life. But saying that, I think this is a testament to how unbelievably amazing the female body is, because we were left for at least a good hour, which was beautiful. We had more than an hour just with us and the baby and everything, and everyone cleared out of the room. And then eventually midwife came back in to see how we were doing, and sort of said, would you like to get up? Would you like to go and have a shower? And you'd think after that marathon, getting up would have been the last thing I'd be able to do or even want to do. But I was amazed at how normal I felt. I got out of the bed. The epidural had well and truly weared off, so I was really normal and steady on my feet. I remember having a shower and just thinking, Jesus, I'm glad that's over. But, I recovered physically actually very, very quickly. And I also, I think, apart from having the normal sort of classic baby blues, given I think I would have been a reasonably good candidate for, some anxiety or postnatal depression, I really didn't. I think I came out of it very well. I had really good postnatal support through friends. Sadly, I didn't have my family there. My mum was here in Melbourne. So I didn't have immediate family, which would have been lovely. My husband, bless him, and his family are lovely. He's got 3 brothers, but at that point, none of them were married or had kids. And, there was nobody on his side who was, practical help with a new baby. But, yeah, despite that, I actually did feel very well supported. There's an amazing organisation in Israel, which is now actually here in Australia, in Melbourne and Sydney, I believe. Over here it's known as Caring Mums or Mum to Mum, depending on which city you're in. And it's a program that, was originated in the States and then was piloted in Israel quite a few years ago. And basically what it is it's a volunteer program comprising of women who are themselves experienced mums, and you get matched with, a surrogate mother, somebody who, just you really connect with, really well. And she will come and visit you one day a week for the whole first year of your baby's life. And she can be your friend. She can be your kind of stand-in mum if you don't have a mother around. She can be more like your grandmother if you kind of want that influence. She can be somebody who gives you advice on newborn care, or just somebody to talk to, or someone to go for a walk in the park with. It really, the relationship you build is entirely up to you as mum and volunteer. And I was matched with this amazing lady originally from the UK. And she was a huge part of my life for that first year, and just having somebody who, every week came to visit me. If there were days when I just looked exhausted, she'd say, right, you go to bed. I'm going to look after your son for, a couple of hours. And I think, I just wish everybody had that kind of support, because I don't know, without it, I probably wouldn't have had such an easy time of it. So, yeah, I think despite that, and despite tough beginning, I kind of embraced motherhood, and I was just so excited to have a baby, at all, that and he was a really, really good, very easy, laid back little baby, and he's still a laid back little boy. I mean, he has his moments, but his personality today is really no different to when he came out.
Wow, that's amazing about that program. Is it, and that's exists worldwide that
I think it's growing. I know that it originated as a study, I'm pretty sure, at Harvard University, and then it trialed with a joint research project with the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And so when I took advantage of it, it was still in its sort of study phase. And over there it's called Em La'em, which is just Hebrew for mother to mother. And then when I moved back to Melbourne, I was really thrilled to see that the program had expanded to here. So in Melbourne, it's called Caring Mums, and in Sydney, I believe it's called Mum to Mum. So if anybody wants to look that up, it's available for mothers. It doesn't matter, what your background is, where you're from. I mean, they have a limited catchment area because it depends on the volunteers that they've got and the areas they can service. But really, the only criteria is that it's a mum who needs that extra support, and it might be because she doesn't have her own mum or close family around. She might be a single mother. Really, they don't put a great deal of limits or barriers on who can qualify for this support, and I think it's amazing program.
I want one.
Yeah.
I'll put that in the resources too. I'll have a look at that.
Yeah, and if I'll have a look at the links for you. I'll be able to send them to you. Cool. So yeah.
Now, just before we go into your daughter's birth, with that 5-minute pushing or 3-minute pushing, did you get any tearing, or was it all fine down
tearing. there? No tearing at all, and he just shot out at the end of it.
Yeah, he must have heard too.
Yeah, I think so. I absolutely think so. And but it's amazing though. I think the birth memories just fascinate me, and I just know that I could have dementia when I'm 94 years old. I will be able to tell that story in exact the same amount of detail, and I'll be able to remember that Polly's face, who was the English midwife. Because there were so many, I do have memory blanks, even now my husband says, how do you not remember that bit? Like, how do you I'm like, I don't remember. I have no memory of huge chunks of it. And I don't know, really, I really think about that. I think, is that self-preservation? Is that, I don't know, the body kind of just, eliminating anything that's unnecessary so that it can, do the work it needs to do without being distracted. I don't know, but I've never been more determined in my entire life than when I got that, literally that rod up my back from the midwife saying, you got to get this baby out now.
Wow. It like you said, it is some sort of mechanism in the body for survival for both of you, and I just think that midwife just helped egg that on. She was there at the right place at the right time for you.
Absolutely.
So with the training that you did with Rachelle, did that help with this? Do you think that if you didn't engage with that course, things might have been a little bit different for you guys?
I don't doubt it for a second, to be honest. I mean, yes, as I said, it wasn't the sort of dream birth that I kind of envisaged. But saying that, I learned so much. We both did. My husband and I learned so much in that course about, the realities of hospital birth, particularly in Israel, which is where we were. We learned about, I think things like interventions and informed decision making, really, really important things, as well as obviously all the comfort measures and the relaxation techniques and the pharmacological forms of pain relief. Like, it was a very comprehensive course. It was actually for 5 weeks, and each session was 3 hours long. So it was a lot of birth preparation. And then we had a lovely reunion class afterwards with all of our babies. And we were 5 couples, and we all had boys. So there were 5 boys at the reunion. So I think that the class prepared me. It gave me a lot of knowledge. It gave, or both of us, as I said, it gave us a really good, thorough understanding of the process of labour, but what to do, I think, very importantly, when things kind of don't go to plan. And I don't think enough women are prepared for those things. I think it's important and very important, actually, to have high expectations and to go in with a really positive, empowered, frame of mind. But I think what can really make some women come completely undone is when the plan doesn't go to plan, and they're suddenly finding themselves in the scenario of, well, this wasn't in the plan, and they don't know what to do, and they really, really come unstuck, and that's when the panic sets in. That's when the adrenaline surge, starts, ramping up in the body, and it becomes incredibly difficult to remain objective and open-minded, and to be able to still find, I guess, empowerment even when, you're traveling along, plan B or C. And I think that's what the course really did for me, because I agree. I think that birth could have really had very different outcomes had I not really, and, strongly advocated for myself, that my husband felt, equally empowered to say no, or give us time, or no, we refuse this, or whatever. And a doula, I learned about doulas. I'd never heard the word doula in my life before taking that class. And Debbie, who was our doula, was a godsend for us, because there were moments when my husband was absolutely wiped out, exhausted, and she was able to keep going, or they tag teamed, So yes, I learned so much, and I think that I ended up with, not the, not the dream birth, but I certainly ended up with a good outcome. And I think the fact that I really recovered emotionally, if not physically, but certainly emotionally from the birth so well and so quickly afterwards, showed that I think that my headspace was good, and my emotional well-being was really intact.
Great. Again, it's support, isn't it? It's just what each story that I listen to, it all just comes down to your support. And if you're going through, an interesting experience during your birth, and you got that beautiful support network after, then, like you said, your recovery is so much better when you're supported and told that you can do this and allow what's normal to come through into mothering.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So 3 months later, you conceived again.
Yeah.
And would you like to tell us about your daughter's birth?
Sure. So, as you said, I found out I was expecting my daughter when my son was 12 weeks old. So in my classes today, I make a point of talking about, postnatal contraception.
Yep.
and that old wives' tale of, exclusive breastfeeding doesn't, certainly doesn't mean that you can't fall pregnant. So yes, anyway, I just remember, I don't know, I had a niggling feeling. It wasn't symptoms. It wasn't like classic pregnant, symptoms, sore boobs and this and whatever. I just felt weird. And I thought, so I went and got another, pregnancy test. And unlike with my son, when I was literally jumping up and down and leaping for joy, I was so excited to find out I was pregnant. With her, I was like, oh my God, this is not happening. I was still wearing maternity clothes. I hadn't unfairly lost a kilo from the first birth. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So, so that was a bit of a shock. And I was actually scared to tell my mother in Australia. I thought she would have, thought I'd lost my mind. Anyway, luckily I had, again, excuse me, I was very blessed to have a very, very healthy, normal pregnancy. No surprises along the way, no complications, which, look, considering I had only just given birth, I was certainly at higher risk, I think, of having some complications, because, your body needs to recover from pregnancy and birth. A lot of health experts do recommend, at least, 12 months postpartum before you try to conceive again, just to give your body time to recover itself. So I barely had that opportunity, but look, saying that, I had a great pregnancy. I was, really happy, healthy. I was tired because I was caring for a little baby. And I remember right towards the end of the pregnancy, we moved apartment, and, God, you do some crazy things when you're pregnant, I have to tell you. So we moved from a really, really nice but very tiny 1-bedroom. Obviously, clearly we had to move. So we found a 2-bedroom, but it was on the top floor of a 4-story apartment building with no elevator, and nowhere to even put things like prams and stuff. There was a basement that you could kind of go down a level to. So I remember being really pregnant, seriously 7-8 months pregnant, and having my, 10-month-old son who was not walking yet, trying to maneuver him and a stroller, going down into a basement, coming back up with him, and nappy bag and shopping. And maybe that's what kept me so fit. I don't know. But it was just I remember going to the top and I'm just thinking, I don't care if the building's on fire. I'm not leaving again. So, that was quite tough in those last few months with both of them, and then when they were both here, they both arrived. Again, I remember having my daughter in the sling in the front, and my son in the car seat, in my other hand, and it was a nightmare. Anyway, with her, look, I think a lot of women find with their second or subsequent children that the labor and the birth is a lot quicker and a lot less complicated, and that was definitely the situation with me. Interestingly, though, I had the same issue with the low amniotic fluid, which, interesting, I have learned since is actually there's a lot of very inconclusive evidence about low amniotic fluid levels in late pregnancy. It's certainly in itself not a reason to induce. There need to be other factors at play that concern your health care provider about your health or your baby's health. But in and of itself, low fluid levels are not necessarily, a reason to be concerned. But, they did a good job of convincing me that I needed to be concerned. So I think I was about 2 or 3 days past the due date. So I was right, ready to have her any time. But they were super keen to induce. And, but the big difference was with this one is that when I arrived at the hospital, and again, I'm calling Debbie the doula, and I said, right, here we are, round 2. Almost exactly, she was born a year and a week after my son. So there's literally a year and a week between them. And it was all very deja vu. But thankfully, this induction process was a totally different ball game. I remember the midwife sort of looked, and when she did an internal, she said, "Oh, you're already like 3 centimeters." So I was really already in the early stages of labor, which was a wonderful thing because it meant that my body was already doing what it needed to do. So I ended up having a very different induction method with her. I had the Foley catheter, which is a balloon catheter. It gets inserted into the cervix and it kind of self-inflates. And basically it's a mechanical dilator. And so it dilates the cervix, and then when it gets to a certain point, it's supposed to fall out. In my case, it didn't, and that was probably, I'd say, of the entire labour and birth, that was the most. If anything, I would go as far to say it was actually quite traumatic because they needed to remove that balloon, which had inflated quite considerably, intact. And that was more painful than giving birth, literally, to that damn balloon. Anyway, it was
sorry, just to interrupt.
Yeah.
So that balloon, did that hurt, or did you feel like pain or anything while it was in?
When it was uncomfortable. You kind of waddle around. I mean, you can walk. You can, it doesn't really restrict your movement. It's uncomfortable, but it was the actual removal of that inflated balloon because it's not supposed to be taken out inflated. It's supposed to fall out. It's supposed to deflate automatically. So they had to pull it out inflated, which was quite excruciating.
Yeah.
But certainly by the time it was out, I was probably 5 or 6 centimeters, and in very strong active labor. And but this time I think I did things so differently. I refused to get on the bed for any length of time. I refused to be monitored for anything but the absolute bare minimum amount of time, which a couple of minutes, every hour, every other hour. And other than that, I was just pacing the halls and bouncing up and down the ball. And my doula was giving me these awesome massages, and so it was just another experience altogether. And much quicker. I mean, I don't think I'm not one of these women who have these sort of 3-4 hour labors. I mean, it's still pretty long, but from beginning of active labor to her being born was probably about 11 hours, which is a lot quicker than the 35 plus hours with my son. And the only thing with her, actually, we discovered after she was born was that she had a very, very short umbilical cord. So what was happening is that, when I was pushing, she would descend and you'd see a little head kind of, coming, and then she'd go back up, which is not in itself unusual. That often happens in between contractions. The head moves up again, but then the next push, it descends even further and so forth. So that wasn't happening. She would just descend the same amount and then she'd pop back up again, and she'd come down and she'd pop back up, and they couldn't understand why she wasn't descending any further. So in the end, she needed a little bit of vacuum, but really not that much, and it was really not particularly. It certainly wasn't painful or invasive. I don't think, I didn't feel it particularly, and she was fine. And we realised afterwards that that was a good call because she wouldn't have been able to descend on her own. And once she was out, they thought, wow, this is one seriously short umbilical cord. It's probably half the length of a normal cord, so she couldn't have descended. She just literally didn't have the length in the cord to be able to do it. So, so that was really the only, if you like, complication with her, but it was pretty minor. I was able to do delayed cord clamping. My husband cut the cord, and it was just so much easier. It was just so. I just remember there was this air of absolute. Everybody in the room was relaxed. There wasn't like with him. Everybody was. There was so much angst in the room and stress and anxiety, and everybody was just. And with her, it was just everyone was just chilled, and it was just such a different experience with her. So yeah, it was good. And my mum was in Israel at that point. She'd come and she'd flown over, and it was great because she was at home with my son, so we could be, you know, at the hospital with, you know, together, my husband and my doula and stuff, and not worry about him at all. And I think having her there as well for the first few weeks after the birth was lovely, because I had two babies to look after now.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy, but yeah, just such a different birth experience with her. You know, I just felt so much more in control. You know, and more experience. Like, I had been through it before, and I'd had a really difficult experience. So pretty much anything was going to be easier and better than what I'd, you know, initially experienced with him.
So with the short umbilical cord, did she just sort of come up near your belly, or how does?
Yeah, well, just she really was. They laid her pretty much right at the bottom of my belly and just above the pubic bone. That's as far as she would stretch. They literally were able to sort of pull her out and turn her over straight onto the bottom of my tummy, and then they waited. You know, I was hell bent on, you know, delayed cord clamping, and so, and they were fine about that. They were, you know, totally on board with that. Yeah, and so yes, it was just very, very, very different, and yeah, good and good, easy recovery. Yeah.
Was your placenta in better condition?
Oh yeah, it was, yeah, normal, healthy, what it should look like. What it didn't look like with him, that's for sure. So yes, I saw a very, very different placenta with her, and she came, like, as I said, it was 3 days past the due date, so she was really she came at a good time. Yeah,
great. Thank you so much for sharing those stories. And would you just like to sort of, I'll take all your resources and we'll link them up on the website, so people can go to what you've mentioned. With the Lamaze, could you just wrap up in a sentence or two, especially for first-time mums that are looking for some kind of childbirth education, what Lamaze could offer them?
Sure. Look, a couple of things that's really important to know about Lamaze. One is that it's not a method. It's not a technique or method-based. Oh, it's okay. It's not like a method-based childbirth education program. So it's not like you go into a Lamaze class and you go, okay, you're going to learn, you know, breathing method A, B, and C, or this. It's a very holistic program. It really spans as healthy pregnancy, healthy birth, and healthy parenting. So, you know, Lamaze courses encompass early parenting as well. They don't just sort of stop at the birth. Also, very importantly, I think to know for parents interested in taking a Lamaze course is that it's entirely evidence-based. It really prides itself on presenting the most current evidence-based information we have available. And it's really, I think, bottom line, I think Lamaze is about empowering women and their partners to make good choices for themselves, for their bodies, for their babies. It's about inspiring confidence and confidence in your body's ability to give birth. And it doesn't matter whether you're choosing a home birth or a birth center or you know, more mainstream, you know, maternity unit, hospital birth. The education applies to all birthing women. And, you know, I think I was a great example of somebody who took really the core message, you know, when I was preparing for my son's birth, because it didn't go to plan. It went about as far from plan as you could possibly get. I actually I saw my birth plan on my computer the other day. I thought, oh, gee, I haven't looked at that for a while. And I was like, okay, well, that didn't happen. But, you know, I learned a lot in that class, and my husband learned a lot, and we felt empowered and confident, and we knew that we could be powerful advocates for ourselves. And that's, you know, I think that's what I want to give women. I want women to feel that they have choices, they have options, and that it's your body and it's your baby, and you have the absolute right. You have the right that nobody else has to make decisions about your care. And, you know, if I can instill confidence in women to do that, then I feel like I've done my job. So, yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And, you know, as we were talking before we were recording, we're in this field of so much information, and it's good to just bring it all back together and keep it quite simple, and that is the key word. Let us take responsibility and charge of our own bodies and our births. And just these stories that you told, it really honours your experience and, you know, how important support is and how things could have gone different if you didn't choose to, you know, do this or that. And I think, to me, it's really interesting to hear these type of journeys, because if we don't hear all sorts of birth stories and all spectrums and embrace the actual journey, you know, we might be like you said, you get faced with all sorts of situations in birth. We don't know how it's going to go, but if we're well supported and and informed, then we're going to manage it better afterwards.
Absolutely. Sure. I mean, you know, there's been a lot of stuff in the media recently about birth trauma, and I think it's slowly becoming, you know, more widely understood that, you know, birth trauma is real, and there's a lot of women who are kind of the walking wounded, really. Because they've had such difficult and traumatic experiences. And, you know, if the mother is healthy and the baby is healthy, they don't understand that, you know, well, how can you be traumatized? Like, you know, and it's, you know, the trauma's on the inside. And I think, again, the support is key and it's critical, because it really sometimes, you know, the outcome isn't, you know, what you planned, but if you felt supported all the way through and you just had somebody literally by your side the whole time, it just makes the world of difference. You know?
Yeah, exactly right. And I'll also link to not naming the journalist, but that recent article that you wrote back about, and I just think that was so brilliantly written. I mean, you know, the fact that we're having to do that all the time is silly, but I'll link that in the resources too.
Right.
Now, would you just like to share your website with people in case they're listening?
Sure. Yeah. So it's just birthwellbirthright.com.
Yep.
So you'll find, pretty much everything there, including the training. So I now offer a Lamaze Educator training program, which so if anybody feels like their calling is to be a childbirth educator, I'll be doing trainings next year in Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane. So
great. Thank you, Tanya. Thank
you so much, Ali,
sharing these amazing stories and your journey. And I do appreciate it, and I'm sure people will get a lot out of it and connect with you through that.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Did you connect with this episode? Then head over to our website, circleofbirth.com. There you'll find show notes, pictures, resources, and potentially connect with today's storyteller. Don't forget to sign up to be updated with new empowering episodes and content. Help the show grow by contributing a tip in the jar to make sure we can continue to better the podcast and connect more and more to the wisdom of birth and each other. Hey, and don't forget the iTunes rating. This has been another episode of the Birth Share Project. We breathe, we birth, we empower.